Hi, it's Dr. Greg Jantz. Time for a little more hope and possibility. Do you possibly have somebody in your life that could fit the category of emotionally abusive? I'm going to talk about that and what constitutes emotional abuse next.
Dr. Gregory Jantz is a best-selling author of over 45 books and the founder of the Center A Place of Hope, voted a top 10 center for depression treatment in the U.S. As the pioneer of whole person care, Dr. Jantz is known as the messenger of hope. Now the nation's expert on anxiety, depression, substance abuse, relationships, trauma, and PTSD, here is Dr. Gregory Jantz.
Okay, are you with somebody? And I have a whole list here. And in 1992, I wrote a book called Healing the Scars of Emotional Abuse. And emotional abuse comes in many different forms. Let me just quickly define it. Emotional abuse is to be treated unfairly, unjustly by one person or a group of people, like cyberbully behavior or people in a group that turn against you, consistently over time. Everybody makes a mistake and may say something once, like, that's so stupid, or you make a comment. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about deliberate actions. And by the way, if you ever said or did that, then the next thing to say is, I'm sorry, please forgive me. But what we're talking about is a deliberate intent to mistreat, wear you down, etch down that sense of self so you feel like you have no value. Let's see. Are you with somebody? Could be a spouse, could be a loved one, could be a friend, could be, maybe it's a coworker. And here's some of the things that you see. Unpredictable temper. And by that, you never know when the volcano is going to go off. The volcano. And sometimes during the holidays, and sometimes we see this move in seasons. There is an intensity. Sometimes it starts around Halloween, continues through Thanksgiving, and peaks right around Christmas. There's intensity of emotions around certain holidays. Look for that. Are there threats? And threats come in different forms. There is the threat in our words, a threat to harm you, a threat to take and control your money or take something from you, a threat to hit you. Sometimes an emotional abuser will have just right on the edge of words and behavior, and you don't know what they're going to do. And it seems very controlled because they do everything right up to hitting, right up to pushing, right up to any kind of physical contact. And they know not to do that. See, this is what we call deliberate, manipulative, and it's powerful. And keep these two words in mind: power and control. Emotional abuse is all about getting that power and control. Now, one of the things that you may find, if there's kids involved, children involved, a lot of threats around kids, taking them from you, reporting you're a poor parent. And emotional abuse, it could be from either spouse. Whatever makes up the relationship, it could be coming from either side. And that's important to know and to acknowledge that it's not just men, and it can be situations. Sometimes when we think of emotional abuse, we've kind of pigeonholed it to be just men, and I just want you to think about that broader. There can also be a threat of, I'm going to leave you, a threat even to commit suicide. You have treated me so poorly that, look, my life's not even worth living. And they start to control through great fear that that they're going to do something like take their life. We've seen situations where maybe a firearm or a knife, something's been taken out to amplify that threat, I'm going to take my life. There could be on the sexual side, force. Force could come in all kinds of force, physical hurting, a deliberate attention to create pain, but sex to control, sex to exercise power, and it can be, in a word, very messy. This is sometimes not only emotionally brutal, potentially physically really brutal. And we can talk in terms of rape, we can talk in terms of physical force, violence. So a lot can go under that heading of emotional abuse and sex. The next one, emotional abuser, they may take aim at hurting your belongings, stuff. You may come home and something that is cherished by you is broken. You may find that they maybe tear clothes, or some favorite clothing items suddenly disappear. You may find that they will, if there's a pet involved, and it can start slowly. Sometimes they'll maybe lock a pet in a closet. Other times, intentionally mistreat or hurt that pet in front of you. Okay, the two words, power and control, and sometimes power and control comes across with a lot of cruelty. Not only cruelty to you, but cruelty to animals. So we want to make sure we are being really honest about what is emotional abuse. So think of it in terms on a continuum. Maybe on one side we could have name calling, and I hate to say milder, but as we move along that continuum, it escalates to rage, destroying property, force, sex mistreatment, and it just keeps going and going to we're full-fledged domestic violence, and emotional abuse has crossed the line. Obviously now it's physical abuse. Haven't mentioned spiritual abuse yet, but let's take a quick look at spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse can come in kind of different flavors. One would be a deliberate misuse of scripture in order to get their way. They could read something, and I'm just going to make this up, but let's say they read something from the Bible, and then they begin to condemn you and tell you that, see, you're not even doing what God says. And so it's misusing not only scripture or Bible, or it could be another religious text. So what I'm saying is, think of the whole area of spiritual, and whatever a person's beliefs is, they're going to attack those and come after those beliefs. Now, there can also be that where they speak for God as though they're God, and tell you that you're unlovable, God will never love you, and they can condemn you as though they're speaking with the voice of God. So there's a lot that can be wrapped into spiritual abuse. One of the things that we want to look is, are they doing this only in private, or do you see abusive things happen in public places as well? So a lot of times an emotional abuser will do a lot of things right in private, and nobody else knows it. And on the outside, away from home or away from that private setting, they're charismatic, they're just well-loved by everybody, friendly, but there's a very dark side to them, a very dark side. And that dark side can be something that is almost unbelievable. When you hear it, you go, I can't even believe the person is that way. It just seems so unbelievable. And sometimes this will go on for years and years and years before it's exposed. Because the goal is to keep, the perpetrator wants to keep the victim a victim. And they train them not to say anything. And fear is part of that power and control. I create a great deal of fear in order to control you. Yes, this could be a narcissistic personality. Yes, this could be a sociopathic personality. And yes, this could be old-fashioned emotional abuse and domestic violence. The person who's the perpetrator is a person that is deeply, deeply wounded and has a really broken sense of their own self. And this is where they get a sense of identity by abusing others. And they can convince themselves that it's really the right thing. And they can convince themselves and believe that they are in the right. So one of the things to look at, do you have somebody in your life that is constantly checking on you, overbearing? Maybe they're limiting your ability to a car, money. They keep you away from other people, keep you away from family, keep you away from friends. They always find a way to control your movement and how you're able to move. Money, car. And you will see that they could be exceedingly over the top jealous of you talking to a family member, jealous of you talking to a friend, easily threatened by just normal interactions. So again, emotional abuse can be pretty obvious, but it also be quite subtle. They can train you as a victim to feel like you're worth nothing, and then they can do it non-verbally. An emotional abuser can hone their terrible skills down to a look, and they can give you that certain look. There's a look, and that look is a look that is threatening, powerful, loaded with fear because you don't know what they may do. So let's keep that in mind. That, yes, words, behaviors, but it can be done non-verbally as well. And emotional abuse in silence, not acknowledging you as a person, that would be another form. Not acknowledging your feelings, anything you said, you could be sharing from your heart. And the emotional abuser might give you a look and never comment, never engage. They're always going to look, they're going to always hold the power, attempt to hold the power. All right, now I said the things they do in private, there's also those things in public. Now, there are the public emotional abusers. Maybe you've been in a restaurant and you've seen this. You might, I'll make this up, but you'll see a couple and it gets a little noisier, and one person's voice is getting a little more intense, a little louder, a little forceful, and maybe you hear some calling another person a name calling. Maybe you're going to see pounding on the table. And this is a habitual way that they treat the other person in the public arena in order to continue to humiliate them. So this does happen in a public setting. And when it's happening in a public setting, sometimes what we find when it's private, it's even more intense. So here's some things to look for. Number one, are they forcing isolation? Okay, I'm going to control you. Where they really set it up where you're more and more dependent upon them. Again, food, money, you name it, shelter, where there's a dependency. We're looking for threats, generally verbal, but can be that particular look. We're looking for intimidation. Intimidation is a little different than a threat. They want to scare you. In my notes here, I wrote down, they want to scare you into submission. And so I'm intimidating you even by how close I get to you. If it's in a public setting, I'm going to get right up in your personal space and be very intimidating. There's other denial and blame where they're going to deny and change reality. This is why it's crazy making. They began to change reality in order to keep that power and control, but you start to doubt. Wait a minute. And you start to doubt your own experience. You start to doubt your own reality. And they may say something like, I never said that. at all. And they're arguing with words and twisting things to make you really feel like you're crazy. It's crazy making. There's a term called gaslighting, that's what that's all about. Distorting reality to convince you that you're crazy. So, all right. Now, the emotional abuser. Again, I'm looking at this on a continuum to milder to very severe. A person who has become an emotional abuser may have learned this. Just growing up in an emotionally abusive home, they're repeating a pattern. And not easy for them to change. At some point, they're willing to get help, and you begin to see some hope for change. And you begin to see that they are becoming a little kinder, a little more compassion. Those are some of the signs you'll see. Kindness, compassion, sincerity. But then you also see a remorse for their behavior, a remorse for how they treated. They really begin to get it and see what happened, and they've learned terrible ways of treating other people and communicating. Okay, that's one form. Now, another form of emotional abuse is maybe under the narcissistic personality, when there's addiction, a person who is struggling with addiction can be exceedingly emotionally abusive, and that amplifies everything. So it could be a person that's had a lot of trauma in their life, and they're reacting out that trauma on others in order to feel a sense of power back in their life. So, but there's the deliberate attempt to cause harm. There's a maliciousness. They have an intent to cause harm. So look at emotional abusers as those that learned it, and that doesn't excuse it. Those who learned it, and they didn't realize the depth of harm that they were creating. And then there's those who have crafted it, probably some personality disorder issues in there, or addiction, or both. And their intent is to cause harm. At times they can seem quite evil, and they will go to great ends to cause harm in another person's life. So that person, in our experience over the years, is very slow to change, because there's some personality issues. There is some deep, I'm going to say deep-seated issues in their life that are characterological, that tend to be a lot slower to change, and a person oftentimes will not stay in treatment. And this is why we look at narcissistic personality, and we're going to look at this over time. They're going to need to be faithful over time, and this is, weeks and weeks, and then move on and do, sometimes you'll see 10, 14, 15 weeks of care, and then they're got to be committed to another year. It's really easy for them to slide back, and the characterological changes are very slow to make. All right. Just a couple thoughts as I'm sharing from my heart today in my office. And we see, and the reason I'm talking about this now is we see a lot of emotional abuse kind of pop up during this time of year, where it tends to amplify over and over. You could see, and we'll wrap up here for this segment on emotional abuse, you could see a person who they do a behavior, there's the abuse, and maybe they do feel some guilt. They know something's not right. But then they make up excuses. And there's a little continuum here. And then they seem maybe a day or two kind of normal. And then you see the cycle will keep repeating itself over and over and over. And this is why I say it can be very difficult and challenging to live with, work with, be married to, have a close relationship with a person who's an emotional abuser. And you're going to if you're living or close to that situation, lots and lots of just anxiousness. Anxiety is going to be really high, probably a sense of depression because your sense of self is really being oppressed. You may notice some great sleep disturbances, even frightening dreams, because you do not feel emotionally safe, and you may not feel physically safe, and those would just be normal. We're going to talk more about emotional abuse and breaking it down to the different types of abusers our next time together. I like to keep these brief, short, and fairly fast because I really honor a person's time that would spend time with me, joining me in a setting like this. And we want to do some things in our time together that, well, first of all, hopefully increases awareness, and secondly, causes us to spur on some action. And we'll talk about here soon what to do if you're living with an emotional abuser.